Thank you for coming today. I'm really excited to be here. And maybe before we get in, I'll just give you a little background on Electrify Now and how this all started. I retired from another sneaker company about 4 years ago, and I was working there on corporate sustainability. And when I retired, I'd always been kind of interested in, well, really obsessed, actually is a better word, with what individuals can do to help fight climate change. And so when someday you will experience this, when you retire, you have a lot of time. And so I had time to research and just poke into things and learn a lot of things that I didn't learn on the job, actually, about sustainability and specifically around energy. And it led to being extremely frustrated that there wasn't really good sources of information available to regular people about the really impactful things we can do and about our role in changing the systems that are really at the heart of the climate change problem, our energy systems. And at the time, who remembers the whole plastic straws thing, where it seemed like the only thing anyone wanted to talk about in sustainability was straws. And that's what was happening 4 years ago. And so in the face of that, it felt like while that's, waste is obviously a really important issue and recycling are really important issues, it felt like they were masking the real conversation that should be happening, which was about energy. And so you're going to see that most of what we talk about today is about energy. And the reason of that is pretty simple, because I have to admit that even though I was a corporate sustainability officer, I couldn't really have answered this question very adequately 4 years ago until I really started to dive into it. And you had to do some math, because the way that this information is presented is usually not very helpful. So what I've done is I've taken information from the EPA and I've repackaged it a little bit to make it simpler. And what you find out is a quarter of the emissions in this country come from generating electricity. A little bit over another quarter come from transportation, and we're going to dive into these things a little bit more later. And then another quarter or more actually is from burning fossil fuels for heat. And then, of course, there's agriculture. There's a lot of airplay around this too. And again, there are agriculture issues for sure. But it's important to realize that they pale in comparison to these other ones that are about energy. And even in that agriculture number of 11% here in the United States, a huge portion of that is fertilizer, and there's energy related to that too. And then there's these other mysterious industrial processes, but those are, largely speaking, cement and municipal waste, treatment plants, things like that. So 82% of the problem, so to speak, is from burning fossil fuels for these three types of energy that it's hard to imagine us doing without, right? I mean, we're going to need electricity, we need transportation, we need heat. And in actual fact, people all over the world need these things, and there are some countries where they don't have, they don't have proper access to those, what we consider to be like essentials. If you look at other countries around the world, you'll see a very similar picture. It'll change slightly from country to country. If you looked at Europe, it would be almost identical. Country like maybe a country in Africa or South America, the agriculture number would be higher, but it's still going to be in that 70 to 80% from energy. So, all right, let's think about it at the household level. At the household level, about 60% of the emissions that we're responsible for as individuals comes from the energy that we purchase. So think of it as your electric bill, your natural gas bill if you have that, or gasoline to fill your cars. And then, there's carbon emissions associated with the products that we buy and the food that we eat. But I think all of us would probably attest to the fact that it's hard to do a lot over here. You can buy responsibly. You can buy from companies like Adidas that are really sweating the details on lowering carbon emissions on stuff. You can buy food that's grown locally and organically and regeneratively. And maybe you shave these percentages a little bit. You make these boxes slightly smaller. But this big 60% box here, it's entirely possible to take that to zero. Completely eliminate 60% of your personal emissions. And we've done it in our home. I know a lot of people here have done, Eli and Noel, who I'll introduce you to later, have done it in their homes too, and we've helped hundreds of people around the state of Oregon to do these things. It's entirely possible to do. And so that's kind of why it's so important to be thinking about energy, because the root of the problem is that we have been burning coal and natural gas to produce electricity primarily. There's obviously more renewables coming on all the time now, which is good. We've been using gasoline and diesel for transportation, and natural gas, and to some degree propane and heating oil, but it's really natural gas is the problem on the heat side. And this is one where I like to spend a little extra attention because there's so much greenwashing around natural gas. I mean, you hear this all the time, the clean blue flame, and Northwest Natural talks a big game about getting to zero, which is technically not possible and highly unlikely to happen and extremely expensive to do. And we learn all the time that methane, although it has its reputation as a bridge fuel, it's not a lot better than coal in terms of its total impact. It's a major source of air pollution. It's invisible. You don't really see it, but burning natural gas is becoming one of the most important sources of air pollution in our city and other cities around the country. And then you'll hear this story about renewable natural gas, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it suffices to say, while yes, there may be a role for renewable natural gas in our future energy systems, the idea that we can just like keep burning gas in our homes and it's going to be all clean is just completely poop, as Nancy Pelosi would say. Okay, so the bad news is that we have to stop burning fossil fuels. And I think it's important to think about this, to absorb that context, like stop burning fossil fuels. I mean, I think for a lot of us in the environmental movement have grown up with this idea of less of everything. And that's a good thing, but at this point, less isn't enough. It's about eliminating fossil fuels, burning fossil fuels altogether. And that's what we're going to talk about in the context of our own homes in particular. The good news, though, after all that bad news, is that wind and solar are now the lowest cost ways to generate new energy. And it's even starting to be the case that wind and solar competes with existing, new wind and solar competes with existing things like existing gas plants, et cetera. So you can see the white lines here, wind and solar have just plummeted in cost over the last 20 years. And they're projected to go even further. I mean, right now we're hitting a little speed bump where we're seeing some price increases because of supply chain stuff, which it'll take a while to get sorted out. But the future, all the experts say that these two technologies are continue to go lower and lower in price because as we build more of them, it's a technological problem that as you build more of these things, the price gets lower. That's not true with things like fossil fuels or commodity products where there's really there's not tremendous economies of scale that you get from doing more of it. The costs for natural gas have been extremely flat over the last 30 years, and even as new technologies like fracking have come along. So the point is, renewables are going to get cheaper while fossil fuels are most likely going to get more expensive as carbon taxes and things like that start to get applied. So that's great. Battery storage costs, same thing's happening. The costs are plummeting and will continue to go further. And then the other thing that a lot of people don't see because it's been so incremental is that electric appliances have become unbelievably more energy efficient in our lifetime. And the light bulb is kind of like a poster child for this. The LED light bulb, 10 times more energy efficient than the incandescent bulb, the LED to the incandescent. But that's true of everything. Our refrigerators, our computers, our stereos, anything that you plug into the wall is using much less energy now than it did even a decade ago. And so what you see is that as a result of more renewables coming online, that our electricity supply is getting cleaner. This is what's been happening over the last 20 years. And this curve is starting to get really much steeper because there's incentives now, the technology is cheaper. Like if you look at the data, basically almost all the new energy generation that's scheduled for the next 5 years is renewables, is primarily renewables. So this line's going to continue to go down. So you add all these things up, cheap renewables, electric devices that are extremely efficient, a grid that's getting cleaner literally every minute, not just every year. And it's impossible to kind of escape this idea that we should be electrifying everything. And you hear this terminology more and more. Sometimes you hear beneficial electrification. I'm like, you're picking nits. It's about electrifying everything. And it's conjuring up this image of a future where we get all of the energy that we need from the wind and the sun, and it powers all of those three primary energy needs that we talked about: electricity, transportation, and heat. And the truth is that the technology is available today to do this today. And so that's why this electrification movement has started to really pick up speed. And there's these almost like too good to be true side benefits that come along with doing this. First of all, our energy costs go down. Second, we get clean air. Think about this for a minute. Like, where does pollution come from? It comes primarily from burning stuff and primarily from burning fossil fuels. We get cleaner water and more available fresh water. I've heard estimates that vary anywhere from 10% to as high as 30% of available fresh water that's used for fossil fuels production in various places around the world. So much more clean water and a stronger economy. All the studies show that this transition, while it's going to be expensive, it also creates tons of jobs, and it lowers costs in other ways that pay for itself over time. Tremendous savings in health costs and other things that are kind of, again, almost like side benefits in our battle to stop climate change. So that's all the good news, but then, back to the bad news. I don't know if this is bad news. This is just like a reality, is that if you think about, again, this context of zero fossil fuels, that before 2050, which is the kind of artificial time we picked where we got to get our crap together, every single device that burns fossil fuels today needs to be replaced with a clean alternative. And this is where it gets a little bit, like, it can feel daunting. Thousands of coal plants and gas plants need to be retired and converted to renewable energy. Millions and millions, hundreds of millions of cars and trucks need to be converted from fossil fuels to clean electric. Millions of gas furnaces and boilers and all those things, that some of which we have in our homes, but every building most likely has something in it that's burning fossil fuels. Those need to be replaced. So that can feel overpowering. Rewiring America, our friends there talk about 1 billion machines that need to be, replaced. But on the other hand, we have 30 years to do this, and in those 30 years, the sooner the better, but in 30 years, all those devices that we just listed are going to see the end of their useful life, most likely. So the point is, we should be switching them over as quickly as we can, but for sure, when anything has its end-of-life event, we need to make sure we're replacing it with something better. And that's part of the reason why we're talking today, because I have no idea in your lives, your ability or interest or where you are on this whole thing about replacing stuff. But the first step is to know what the options are, the good options are, when the time comes to replace something. So, and again, back to the good news here, we have all the solutions we need. We have wind and solar that's super available. We'll talk about how you get that. We have electric vehicles that are actually way more cost-effective and accessible and affordable than a lot of people think. We'll talk about that. There's heat pumps, which are these kind of almost like magic technology for heating our buildings and our water. They're available today. These are not things that we need research to figure out. They're solutions that are here, and the issue that we have is really a scaling issue, which is, again, why it's so important that all of us understand what the options are, because we can be part of the scaling solution. Okay, so just to give you an idea about why this is so powerful, when we combine renewable energy and electrification, it's not just reducing emissions a little bit, you're eliminating emissions whenever you combine those two things. And the easiest way to see this is in our own homes. So here in Oregon, a typical home will produce something like, or be responsible for, maybe there's a better way to say it, 3 to 5 tons of carbon emissions from the electricity that we consume to power a typical home. 3 to 5 tons. It can be more than that or less than that if you have a small home, et cetera. But that's a good range, 3 to 5. And one car, 4 to 8, again, depending on how much you drive it and what mileage you get, but you get my idea. A gas furnace, pretty similar to a car, 4 to 8 tons, and a gas water heater, 1 to 3 tons. So these are the 4 typically largest sources of emissions that any one person has in their life. And if you're really diligent, so put your old school conservation hat on, and you're turning the lights off, and you're wearing the sweater, and you're driving slower and less often, and you're taking cold showers. You could reduce these numbers by 20% if you're really diligent and you do these things every day. But compare that to what happens when you combine renewable energy and electrification. First of all, we're going to get our renewable energy from community solar, which we'll talk more about it, but you can do that right today if you're interested. But you can get your energy, your electricity from renewable sources. You can do it today. 0 tons for your electricity. An EV charged with that renewable electricity will create 0 tons per year. Your heat pump, again, running on that clean electricity, will produce 0 emissions to heat your home and 0 emissions to heat your water. So we haven't just reduced them tiny, we've eliminated them completely from our homes by taking these actions, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail. And the result of that is the typical home that would be normally creating 20 to 30 tons of CO2 just from the energy emissions part that we talked about can go to 0. And the other amazing thing about this is that a typical home here in Oregon is going to cost us about $4,000 a year for those energy bills we talked about, electricity, gas, and gasoline. It can be higher than that because gasoline has gone up quite a bit. 2-car family, it might be closer to $5,000. And you could be spending $3,000 instead. And the other thing is, think about where this money is going. When you spend $4,000 a year, where does that money go? It goes to buying fossil fuels, the vast majority of it. And when you spend this, in this scenario, this $3,000, you're spending it on the solutions, renewable energy, clean transportation, heat pumps. You're investing that money that you have to spend on the solution rather than on the problem. So that's why this is so impactful, this combination of renewable energy and electrification. And along the way, you're going to live in a home that's safer and more comfortable. We'll talk about why that is. We talked about this, spending your money on the solution rather than the problem. And the other thing that I think is really important to kind of think about a little bit is that it's really easy to think about your carbon footprint and go, oh, this is my carbon footprint. How can I make it go to 0? It's a good way of thinking. But it's equally as powerful to say, how can I be a positive force for change and help to scale these solutions that we know are the important things? And one of the ways to do that is to, if you decide buying an EV is right for you, talk to your friends and family about how great it is. If you decide that a heat pump water heater really makes sense in your home, tell all your friends about it, because what you're doing is you're helping to propagate these solutions and scale these solutions through your own personal influence. So we try to keep it really simple for people at Electrify Now about, okay, how do you do these things? How do you do this? And so that's why we break it down to these 4 things: getting clean energy in your home, electrifying your transportation, and then we're not going to talk about it as much today just for time, but it's important to recognize that there are a lot of people in our communities even who will have struggled to go through this transition with us, people, low-income people in particular, BIPOC communities, people on the front lines. We have to find ways to help them through philanthropy and policy. So for me, this is more just it's important that we're all aware of that. So when you hear legislation come along that's prioritizing heat pumps for low-income community, it's there's a reason for that. It's because we need to help these folks, and because some of us can do these things on our own.
When you're cooking in an electric kitchen, it is so much nicer. Induction, it just heats up so incredibly fast. It surprises you each time and you're just like, what? It's on, and count to 10, you're good. So I can boil water on mine really rapidly. And And then on the low end, we can kind of Ron Propeel, like set it and forget it, and it just keeps this really stable low temperature. So it has that full range of output. It's so clean. We can wipe it down regularly instead of having to like take these giant cast iron grates and scrub them in the sink. It's very quiet. We can listen to the music and we can hear the food. You can hear whether or not something is actually searing. So that kind of gentleness of an electric kitchen really helps you use those senses that maybe, are being drowned out by this whoosh of fire. It definitely keeps us cool in the summer. You don't have to be in this, hot, stressful environment all day long. It can just be stressful.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan, and today I'm going to lead you through a morning stretching routine that will increase your mobility, relieve stress, help you make friends, improve your posture, and prepare your body for the day. But this routine is way cooler than your typical stretching routine, because while we're stretching, we're gonna learn how you can electrify everything in your home, which will fight climate change, improve the quality of your life, make you friends, improve the quality and safety of your life, and just save you a lot of money. The recently passed Inflation Reduction Act offers homeowners or even renters all sorts of free money to get awesome new stuff. Okay, first stretch, let's go. We are going to start off with our solar panel stretch. We're gonna reach our arms all the way up to the center of our body. Then we're gonna let our arms fall down to our side. We are reaching up to the sun, grabbing those sun rays and bringing them down to our sweet solar panel body. Hey, and speaking of solar panels, did you know that right now you can install a solar system in your home and subtract 30% of solar costs off your federal taxes? The average rooftop solar installation is like $19K, so that's like $4,700 back. Okay, next stretch. Now let's turn this new sunlight into energy. Twist at the waist and let your arms gently hit your sides. Think of your arms as sweet baby sun rays and your body as a solar panel. When light strikes panels, it energizes electrons in the cells, causing electric currents to flow. So now we have electricity. Let's keep going. Now we need to convert this solar energy into a form that works best in our home. We're converting DC electricity into AC electricity. We do this with an inverter. So we are going to now invert our bodies. See what I did there? Let's bend down at the waist. If you can't touch your toes, it's totally okay. You can put your hands on your shins, on your knees, whatever's comfortable. Feel free to bend your knees if you need to. Just release everything. Now we are going to bend backwards. We're going to invert. Put your hands on your hips. I like to have my fingers kind of pointing down toward the ground on my lower back, pushing forward. Okay, now we need to store this converted energy from the sun. We need to store it in our battery. Our battery is gonna be in our chest. Okay, so for our battery exercise, swing your arms, then slowly up again, really opening up your chest and spreading your chest wide. So just like this. Down, taking all that sweet solar energy. And hey, remember that 30% tax credit I talked about earlier? Well, a battery is part of it. You can get money off for your battery system too. Okay, well now that we have power coming in, we need to distribute it through our home. We need to do so with our electrical panel, with our new smart panel to be precise. So we're going to do this by turning our head. So turn your head to the left over your left shoulder. Look, we're sending power to a circuit over there. Oh, it's going to our dishwasher in our kitchen. Oh, that's really cool. We are going to send power over here to our bedroom. Now what's crazy is that electrical panels haven't really changed fundamentally since the 1960s, but these new fancy ones help you to maximize your energy efficiency, which will dramatically reduce your electricity costs. Okay, now we're gonna look down. And here's what's cool as I talk into my microphone. This one is eligible for that 30% tax rebate, but this one, let's look up now, be gentle, is also eligible for just money taken off the top, up to $14,000 for home electrification projects. This one and a lot of others are eligible for that, so stay tuned. Okay, so with all that fancy new electronic infrastructure, we're gonna need better wiring. Lots of the stuff we wanna install requires a different connection, so let's do that now. Let's do some side bends. The wire going that way, the wire going this way, the wire going this way, and the wire going that way. Very good job, Taylor and Taylor. All the Taylors are doing good side bends. Good job, Taylors. And guess what, you beautiful little bendy friends? This wiring can totally be paid for too. It's covered under the upfront discount I mentioned earlier, up to $14,000. Okay, now let's get to our fancy new appliances. Let's start with our electric heat pump exercise. Let's do some windmills with our arms. As opposed to old furnaces, heat pumps use electricity to move heat from one place to another. In winter, it pulls heat from outside and moves it into your home. Very good work, Sam. Beautiful form. Sam is such a natural. He just gets how heat pumps move and how they feel. Now check this out. Let's reverse our arms now. And like our reversed arms, heat pumps can also become air conditioners. In summer, the process is reversed. Warm air is pulled from inside your home and pumped outside. Let's go the other way. Heat pumps are 3 to 5 times more efficient than most current fossil fuel heating systems, so this will save you a ton of money. Back, and all of those discounts are available. The tax credits and money taken off the top. Okay, let's get to our induction stove exercise. Let's do some adorable little bounces to signify the little boily bubbles that are coming up from our new induction stove. I hope you like my little bunny arms too, it's important. Gas stoves burn fossil fuels inside your enclosed home. Did you know that living with a gas stove is like living with a smoker? And oh yeah, a new induction stove is eligible for that upfront discount I talked about earlier. You could get up to $14,000. You could even get this for free with installation. Okay, so you think all those fun incentives are only for home appliances? Wrong you are, Tom. I know there are a lot of Toms watching right now, including Tom from MySpace. For the record, I'm talking to all the Toms. Okay, so you can get thousands of dollars off for an electric car. An electric car. So let's do our electric car stretch. Let's put our arms forward, punch them forward, really kind of straightening these arms. We're gonna grab our steering wheel for a second. Then let's clasp our hands. Now tuck your chin to your chest. Want to hear something bonkers? Right now, you can get how much? Oh, I don't know, $7,500 off a new electric car. Yeah, if you buy a used electric car, you can get $4,000 off. As my friend Steve Pantano will attest, that's probably like 141% off or something. Okay, that math is bad, but just talk to Steve, he'll tell you about it. Okay, but to charge our new electric vehicle, we're gonna need our fancy EV charger. So take your plug with your right hand from across your body, push your arm into your body with your other wrist and plug in your beautiful cord from your new electric wheels. Can you get a tax credit for this? Yep. Are you starting to feel more stretchy? Yes. Okay, now let's switch arms. Take the charger and plug it into the other side. Hey, and while I got you here, did you know that electric cars have better acceleration than comparable gas-powered vehicles? Also, did you know that when you drive an electric car, you're no longer at the mercy of petro-dictators and price-gouging oil companies? Yeah, that part's rad. Okay, last exercise. Remember how cool and fancy our heat pump was from earlier? Okay, well this advanced new technology is also available for your water heater and your clothes dryer. So let's just do some full body circles to commemorate these beautiful pieces of technology. Go all the way down, really bend back. Take your time, be kind to your body. Go in a circle, really bend down. You know, heat pump dryers use like 40 to 50% less energy than an electric dryer. And let's go the other way now. Let's reverse the circles. Heat pump water heaters don't burn natural gas, so you don't risk burning down your home and you're not around all that pollution. All right, well, my friends, I hope your body is starting to feel a little better. I know mine does, because with that, we are done. To finish, let's just take some deep breaths. So inhaling as we bring our arms up, and then exhaling as we bring them down. Feel free to do this a few times. Thank you all for stretching with me this morning. And to learn how you can get all these fancy new rebates and tax credits, visit rewiringamerica.org. I love you. Thank you. A few nights ago, Stephen Colbert said this.
The nervous Nellies over at Consumer Reports are urging homeowners to consider going electric. Why? Because electric stoves are so safe? Kids, I don't want you inhaling particulate matter, so I bought us something that goes from room temperature to the surface of the sun with nothing in between. And when you turn it off, it stays hot for hours.
Stephen Tyrone Colbert. What? I think you might be thinking of your grandmother's electric stove. By the way, a lovely woman your grandmother was. But electric appliances are way better now. This right here is called an induction stove. Now I'm about to do something to make a little point for Stephen, but kids and adults, don't try this at home. And I'm just gonna turn my induction stove to the hottest setting, and I want you to see that this water is boiling. See, it's boiling. We have bubbles, we have steam. This is real boiling water right here. And now I'm just gonna do this. Yeah, right? Okay, can you do that on a gas stove or an old school electric stove? Nope. You know, Stephen, I think this is your windmills cause cancer moment. You don't know what you're talking about. Induction stoves stop being hot the second you take a pan off of them, or in my case, my face. And gas stoves increase childhood asthma and leak harmful cancer-causing chemicals even when they're turned off. Induction is safer, cleaner, and increasingly more affordable, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act. Stephen, I'm so confident induction is better, I challenge you to a scallop off. I'm actually allergic to scallops and they'll kill me if I eat them, but I know some amazing chefs who cook on induction and will make you some delicious induction scallops. And for everyone else watching, check out Rewiring America's IRA calculator to see how much money you can get for an induction stove or other electric appliances.
I'm here today because no one knows what a heat pump is. I got to talk to the Senate, the White House, and people on the street to get the word out. Because I can run on electricity, get the fossil fuels out of your house, and cut your bills all at the same time. Do you know what I am? A big box.
Yeah, I thought you were washing machine.
You thought I was
You're a
washing
fan.
machine?
You do cooling as well as
I
heating?
do. I'm a magic box, you know?
Oh, snap.
We're about to go talk to some senators to get the word out. We're gonna go meet with Senator Heinrich. Senator, good to see you.
Welcome to Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
How can heat pumps help with climate change?
Because instead of burning a fossil fuel in your house to make heat, I run on pure electricity. So while I'm not as sexy as a solar panel, I'm just as important. Well, thank you for meeting with me. I'm a huge fan.
You really are.
I'm here with Mr. Heat Pump. If we install 5 million heat pumps in America, we save 200,000 barrels of oil a day. We'll reduce greenhouse gases, hundreds of thousands of people will be working, and we'll also be saving people money in their homes.
Good to see you. You're looking so good.
We think that a state like Minnesota is perfect for this because we've got cold weather, that's right, so we need heat. But we want to find more cost-efficient, better for the environment ways to provide heat, and you are it.
We're at the White House. We're gonna tell everyone about heat pumps.
Well, what they do is that today, many houses use natural gas for heating, and that creates emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and we have to get rid of all of those by 2050. And the cool thing about a heat pump is it provides all the heat you need, but at the same time it doesn't have any emissions, as long as we have clean electricity. But we're working on that too.
I wish more people knew about heat pumps, right?
Yes, they last a long time. They're efficient. They don't cost a lot, so they work well.
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a heat pump. You want your system to work properly, right?
That's right. That's right.
I like the fact that you don't need to use any kind of fossil fuels to run them. You can get some clean electricity.
Yep.
Yeah.
As I wrap up my trip here in DC, it's clear momentum's building for heat pumps. When you talk to people about it, they get it. Saves you money, it's good for the planet. Future's bright for heat pumps. But there's still a lot of work to do. We got to get out there and take it to the rest of the country. Do we get it?
Americans,
Please listen to us. We have a question we like to discuss. Do you want to save the world and save a lot of money too? 'Cause you can go electric and leave the CO2. 'Cause did you know 42% of emissions in our lives come from machines in our home and the cars that we drive? It's time to get the fossil fuels out of your home. Call your electrician, pick up the phone. We need to electrify everything. How we heat our homes, how we cool our homes, how we dry our clothes. Electrify everything. How we cook our meals, how we heat our water, how we power our wheels. Electrify everything. What if we told you the things you need are all available, discounted or free? In 2022, an important to pass called the Inflation Reduction Act. Now inside this bill are a few provisions to help facilitate your green transition. You can get a better air conditioner or solar panels too, and the government will give you money, it's true. There are different rebates you can access through a discount up front. Money back in your taxes. If you don't have lots of money, just sit back. The High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Act. $40,000 you can collect your fuel the incentives you can expect. Want to dump your furnace for a new heat pump? Get up to $8,000 to make the little jump. Get a smart panel, regulate electric flow. 4,000 up, but that's a lot of dough. You can get $1,600 to pay for weatherization, and this kind of fun covers installation. Electrify everything. How we heat our homes, how we cool our homes, how we dry our clothes. Electrify everything. How we cook our meals, how we heat our water, how we power our wheels. Electrify everything. Let's move on to other rebates you can commandeer. Tax credits you can get at the end of the year. Credit 25C and 25D. You can use them with the discount mentioned previously. For a heat for water heater, you get 2K a year. And 30D gives you even more to cheer. $7,500 for a new EV or truck. $4,000 for a used car and save a buck. If you install solar panels, take a 30%. Better appliances reduce your carbon footprint. Electrify everything. How we heat our homes, how we cool our homes, how we dry our clothes. Electrify everything. How we cook our meals, how we heat our water, how we power our wheels. Electrify everything. For more on how to get all this free money, go to rewiringamerica.org.
Hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar on how to electrify equitably. I'm excited today to have two amazing panelists with us to help us dive into this important topic. We'll be introducing them shortly. My name is Brian Stewart. I'm the founder of Electrify Now, and I'm joined as always with my colleague Joe Wachunas, who splits his time between Electrify Now and New Building Institute. So welcome. If any of you have not been on one of our webinars before, just to introduce ourselves, Electrify Now, we're an all-volunteer volunteer organization here in Portland, Oregon. And our mission really is to help everyone to help create our clean energy future. We do this through trying to help people with electrification tips, practical knowledge, resources, etc. We try to keep it simple for people and urge people to, first of all, get clean energy into your home. There's lots of good ways to do that through electric utility, green energy programs, community solar, or maybe even rooftop solar if that's right for you. And then get rid of everything in your home that burns fossil fuels and replace it with high performance clean energy alternatives. You'll be happy you did, because your home will be safer and more comfortable. And then electrify our transportation, of course. And then electrify everyone. I think we realize that we've got to bring everyone on this journey with us, which is really what we're going to be talking about today. And we can't afford to leave anyone behind. So there's plenty of information on our website about that if you'd like more. I'd also like to just put a shout out to the Sustainable Building Week. We're really honored to be part of that, and there have been amazing events all through the week, ongoing today and tomorrow. So check out sustainablebuildingweek.com for the schedule of great events that are both virtual and in person, that really are all about how we can make buildings that are safer for the environment and for the people who live in them and work in them. I also want to say thank you to those who have donated. We really appreciate your generous contributions. We've had over $500 donated this week so far to this program that we operate with Community Energy Project, a local nonprofit here who's been doing weatherization for low-income families for decades now. And our program that we work with them on is this low-income water heater replacement program, where we will put free heat pump water heaters in homes to replace old gas water heaters and save these families thousands of dollars on their electric utility bills and avoid over 25 tons of carbon for each unit that we install. So thank you for your generous contributions to help us contribute in this way, at least, to this exact problem that we're going to get into in more detail today. Also, just a shout out to our Electrify Coalition members, over 50 organizations around the state, and including in Washington and California, devoted to this idea of promoting electrification. Thank you. A lot of them are really important to help us put on these programs. And I want to give a shout out to our newest coalition member, Electrify PDX. These are friends and colleagues of ours who have started this amazing organization to help educate and promote the idea of electrification. So there's great information on their website about how to do it, resources, etc. We work closely with them on that. But they also have this program where you can get a yard sign, basically, that promotes the idea that you're maybe just starting on your journey to electrify your home, or maybe you've already done it, and let your neighbors know about the amazing benefits. Because, you know, these things are buried in our basements, in our garages, and so they don't show on the outside like an electric vehicle might if it's parked in your parking lot. So I love this idea of helping to just communicate the benefits of home electrification. So check out electrifypdx.com. Also, just one last thing, we've got a great webinar coming up later on this month that Joe will be hosting on heat pump water heaters, where we're going to have manufacturers from every organization that's producing these technologies give us updates on what's going on with this important piece of technology that's at the center of home electrification. So that should be really interesting. All right, Joe, so kick us off here. Why are we focused on electrification and equity?
Yeah, well, thanks, Brian, and thanks everyone for being here today. Real quick shout, if folks want to put where they're coming from into the chat, we always love to see where folks are tuning in from. But of course, you know, virtually every strategy for decarbonization, something we need to do really quickly, calls for electrification. But we run this risk as we electrify that we leave communities and disadvantaged communities behind. They become they could be the last ones to see the benefits of electrification. This idea of targeted universalism says that we should start with priority communities and work our way out from there. And we know that disadvantaged communities are already the ones suffering most from fossil fuel pollution, you know, whether that's with highways, with chemical plants, refineries, construction, agriculture. Just one statistic, Black and Hispanic Americans are exposed to between 56 and 63 more particulate matter pollution than they produce. So we know that that by electrifying, we will help clean up the environment, and that will help all communities. But we want to prioritize disadvantaged communities first. And disadvantaged communities also pay a disproportionately higher a disproportionately higher energy burden. Some statistics say that disadvantaged households spend 6 to 10% on their energy versus 5% or below for higher income households. So this sets up the question: how do we ensure that we are electrifying equitably, and how do we make sure that we're extending these benefits of safer, healthier, more comfortable, lower cost homes and lower carbon emission homes to priority communities? So we're really excited to have that conversation today with two fantastic panelists. First, we're going to be hearing from Michael Stoddard. He's the Executive Director of Efficiency Maine, an incredible efficiency organization in Maine. that runs programs to improve the efficiency of energy use and reduce greenhouse gases in Maine. It serves all the sectors and all regions of the state. Its nationally recognized programs provide consumer information, discounts, rebates, loans, and investments for high efficiency clean energy equipment and strategies to manage energy demand. I've been a huge fan of Efficiency Maine for a while and their amazing program, so we're really excited to kick it off with Michael. And after Michael, we'll be hearing from Sam Barrasso. He's the program manager for the Portland Clean Energy Fund. If you haven't heard about PCEF, you'll be hearing about it soon, this innovative leading program to extend clean energy benefits to disadvantaged communities. He implements this measure 26201 that was approved by 65% of Portland voters in 2018, and he works with frontline communities in the city of Portland to bring PCEF to life. He also serves as the State of Oregon's Environmental Quality Commission, on the State of Oregon's Environmental Quality Commission and the board of the Willamette Partnership. And he previously served on the board of Imagine Black, formerly the Portland African American Leadership Forum. So excited to have both of our panelists on today. We're going to kick it off with Michael and allow Michael to share a screen. If you want to put questions, please use the Q&A for questions, and chat. You can put your thoughts in there. Thanks so much, Michael.
Let me know if you can see that now.
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, terrific. Well, let's dispense with the title page and get into the meat of it. But thank you very much for inviting us to talk about the programs we've been working on in Maine to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to electrify our heating supply primarily, and to try and do so in an equitable way. Make sure that everyone gets to participate. Just a quick recap on who Efficiency Maine Trust is. We were originally formed to run all of the utility programs in the state. So all the electric conservation programs, all the natural gas conservation programs. But then over time, a bunch of other things have been folded in with that. Folks on the West Coast may not be aware that in the Northeast, especially way up Northeast where I am in Maine, we have very little natural gas infrastructure. 60% of our home and business space heating is done with number 2 distillate fuel, or what we call heating oil, and another 10% is propane. So we use delivered fuels for most of our heat, which means we're a great candidate for electrification, and heat pumps has been absolutely the perfect solution at the right time for us to deal with our heating needs in this state in a way that's going to save us money and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So we now have all of these energy conservation programs under our roof, and we are also expanding our scope to manage most of the programs around establishing EV charging infrastructure and EV rebates. So we run these programs. They involve primarily education and outreach and providing financial incentives, and also financing now through our Efficiency Maine Green Bank. So heat pumps for low-income homes. Why are we doing this? I mean, I don't think anyone on this call really needs a much of a refresher, but I'm grabbing these slides out of a recently completed climate action plan that our state drafted through something called the Maine Climate Council. I know all the states are looking at climate action plans and have been updating them over the last 20 or 30 years, but this is the most recent one, and this is the first one in which so much attention was paid to electrification. And what you can see from the graph on the right is that all scenarios that get us to our 2030 and 2050 targets for carbon reductions require major shifting to electrification of our heating, somewhere between 60 and 90%. I would submit that it's going to be much closer to 90% than 60%. And so that's where we got to go. We've got to go. And when you're talking about 60 to 90%, you're talking about everybody. You're not just talking about certain sectors of the economy. And that obviously is going to include low income and moderate income households as well. So, you know, that's one of the reasons we're concerned about electrification of heating for low-income homes. Another one is, of course, we want to make sure people are sharing equitably in the benefits associated with these programs. Our estimates in Maine are that with even just adding a single mini split heat pump to an oil-heated home, you can save about $600 a year. So that's nice for folks who have the discretionary income to afford to put in a heat pump, but not so great for folks who don't. And so we've had to make sure that we can come up with ways to include everybody in that and participating in these programs. We have a couple of different approaches to programs. We have a suite of programs in Maine. Some of them are what we call market-based, and those are ones that Efficiency Maine manages, where there's an assumption that there will be some customer contribution to the project cost. So it may be a lot and it may be very little. In the case of upper and middle income Mainers, we're asking them usually to cover the vast majority of a project cost, like putting in a heat pump or multiple heat pumps. But in the case of low and moderate income Mainers, it's the opposite. We would expect some kind of a contribution, but not a very large one, given their limited means. Our programs at Efficiency Maine are complemented by an additional suite of programs out of the Maine State Housing Authority. They also run our federally funded weatherization assistance program and our LIHEAP program. And they also are now supporting heat pumps in low income homes. In the case of those programs, they are addressing the needs of the neediest in our state. And so they are paying for 100% of the cost of those homes. They did about 500 projects just last year. So how are we doing in getting heat pumps into Maine homes and businesses? This is the trajectory of the last 5 years, 4 years on the bar chart. And then you can see I put in the right margin the results from our most recently completed fiscal year. We actually started this program back in 2013. So we've been at it almost 10 years now. And it followed the trajectory that you can sort of see from those first 3 years, 2018, 19, 20. But then when the pandemic came, people were home a lot more. They were working out of home offices, and that just happened to coincide with the arrival of some new policies that our legislature and our governor championed that gave our organization more budgets and more freedom to really push on heat pumps. And you can see the confluence of those events led to a real transition there, a real jump from 2020 to 2021. And we've been able to maintain that jump at 29,000 units in the most recently completed year. So we're well over 100,000 units added since we started this program. That's the good news. The not so good news is we really need to get back on that ramp up trajectory. And so that's why we're pretty excited to see some of the new federal legislation that has come along, because I think we're going to need another bump to get back on track, to get those targets that I showed you in that earlier graph of those scenarios for carbon reductions. We really need to be on a path where about a fifth to a quarter of all homes in Maine are fully heated with heat pumps by 2030. So we need to hustle. You can see that our year-round occupied dwellings is about 550,000. When we describe a heat pump unit here, we're just talking about the equivalent of one mini split heat pump. So that's nice, but that's not enough to heat a whole home in most cases. So we still have a lot of work to do. I'll also point out in the right margin, you can see that through our market-based programs targeting low-income customers, we were able to get just over 1,000 heat pumps installed last year, and that was complemented by our colleagues at Maine Housing Authority, which added another approximately 500. So we did get some decent participation in the low-income sector.
Michael, can I ask a question about that? I mean,
Sure.
If you had if your dream came true, what would that number of households per year be that you had? What would those bars be saying in terms of numbers? Do you think what's the pace you want to be on, or you think you need to be on?
We need to get up to 50 or 60,000 heat pumps a year. And one thing that I foresee happening in the pretty near future is that instead of these onesies and twosies, we'll be shifting to whole house system replacements. We're in a very cold climate here in Maine. It won't surprise people to hear. And it's certainly the case that heat pumps have to work harder the colder it gets outside. And we have to make sure that the entire home can be heated by a heat pump if people are going to shut off their old central system. And in the early years of this program, we weren't sure of that. This was new technology, a new generation, and there were questions about how it would perform in the super cold temperatures. And there had been bad experiences in the prior decade. So we had some reservations about that. And so the approach was, let's take a piecemeal approach. Let's add one heat pump to supplement the system that is in place, the central system, and we'll displace as much of that as we can. But if anything goes wrong, or if it gets really cold, or if there's some corner of the house that's not being served, the central heating system will still be there. And that was a very nice sell. That was an easy sell to people. It felt very low risk. The problem, as people will no doubt recognize, is that the big central systems are heavyweights, and they tend to fire up and heat up the whole space and shut off the heat pump. And so we're concerned that people aren't getting as much value out of the heat pump as they could be. And so we're really interested longer term in shifting away from the single heat pump supplemental system to a whole house solution. That's why, as I'll show in another slide here, we've started piloting whole house heating replacements in mobile homes for low and moderate income, and we're having very good results with that. So I just want to point out that we quickly realized we needed to have a tiered system of rebates to have more equitable results. And you can see on this slide in front of you what those tiers are that are currently in place. We're constantly playing around with these to try and find the sweet spot of what's reachable to people, but also gets them making some contribution to the project. And I would also add, this is not just a situation of trying to get benefits out to individual homes and businesses. This is a market transformation initiative. And so you're trying to get this boulder up to the top of the hill and then rolling down the other side of the hill. And that is, I think, a little bit of a tension with equity objectives. You know, it costs more to try and make the program accessible to lower income households, and that chews up more of the budget. So there's always a bit of an inherent tension when you're also at the early stages of a new technology and you're trying to transform the marketplace, where you're trying to get this momentum going. And so that's why we have these two parallel tracks. We've been unbelievably gratified at the results we've gotten from a geographic standpoint. I don't assume that everybody knows what the map of Maine looks like or where people live. I look at this and it's obvious to me the significance of this, but suffice it to say, you have population density on the left, you have median household income in the middle, and you have the number of heat pumps per capita, that penetration on the right. The most sparsely populated part of the area, super rural, lots of pine trees and moose, not a lot of homes, not a lot of heat pump opportunities, is in the center and the north and the northeast on this map. And incredibly, that's where we see the highest penetration of heat pump installations, and also, by the way, where the coldest temperatures are. I mean, this is the border with the top of that map is Canada. That's Quebec and New Brunswick. It doesn't get further north than that on the East Coast. And so what you might not know, but it would stand to reason, maybe you know that there are, it's a popular tourist destination for vacationers. Most of the population of Maine is all right along the coast. So on the left map, you see that darker blue area. That's where the communities are. That's where the population density is. And yet, what you see is really good penetration up in the more rural areas. So this is important in our state, where we have a perceived divide between rural and urban. And we've been really pleased to see that the contractor community is really out there pushing these units in those more rural areas. And that's always a concern. I wanted to mention electric vehicles also, since the topic was generally about electrification, just to say that we've really been focusing on making a plan for the use of these federal funds to make sure that the infrastructure is going into the more rural areas and the areas that are proximate to households that do not have access to off-street parking, and therefore it's going to be much harder for them to charge up overnight, which we think is going to be critical to the success of EV penetration. So I don't know if you can see this on your screens, but the darker areas of this map are the areas that are designated as disadvantaged communities, and the pink and colored lines are the priority corridors that we are trying to populate with high-speed EV chargers every 50 miles per to the requirements of the new bipartisan infrastructure law and the NEVI guidelines. So that's where we're going. And when we model out the cost that we're going to be required to invest to get those stations every 50 miles, it's looking like we will in fact get over the 40% target that we want to do for Justice 40 to complete this map. So where you see the dots, the green dots and the yellow dots, that's where we already have a bunch of public EV charging infrastructure, thanks to the VW settlement funds and some other funds that we've been able to get here in Maine. But those pink avenues are the ones that we'll be pursuing next. So I think we're going to be in good shape there. But we didn't stop our analysis there. We also looked at where affordable housing is, and that's what you see on this map on the left. The darker areas, the colored areas, are where there are a lot of more density of affordable housing. And so that's got us thinking this is where we want to target some more EV charging, both high speed and level 2 charging, to make sure that people who live in apartments, people who live in affordable housing, are also going to have access to the benefits of EVs. So I think I can quit there. Finally, we did introduce a tiered system of rebates to try and make EVs more accessible to low and moderate income households. So you can see here that our current set of incentives is pretty heavily weighted towards lower and moderate income households. We also have a provision or a promotion for nonprofit organizations that provide services to low and moderate income. And then in the one case of the low income customers, we've also expanded eligibility to used vehicles. So all of these are attempts to make it more accessible to low and moderate income. Obviously, I think everyone in the country is probably experiencing the same thing we are. There's very, very little inventory right now. So it's a little frustrating to put these things out into the marketplace and not see very much action. There's just no action there's barely any action to be had due to the lack of inventory. At least that's the case on the East Coast. Maybe you guys on the West Coast are having a little better luck than we are. Finally, I'll just wrap up. We've done a lot of work to try and figure out every possible way that we can reach more households that would be low and moderate income and that would be facing higher barriers to accessing these programs. And I'm sure others on this call are sensitive to the challenges. You're dealing with confidential lists, trying to find ways to validate eligibility, trying to find ways to reach these communities. And we've made quite a lot of progress, but we have been partnering with our Department of Health and Human Services in this state to validate anybody's participation in a means tested program, whether it's federal or state level. And that has really opened up the universe of households we've been able to work with. Beforehand, we were limited to just those households that were on the HEAP program or the LIHEAP program, which in Maine is just, it's probably a quarter to a third of all the households that could be eligible. So by expanding to include TANF and SNAP and Medicaid, that's really opened things up quite a bit. And then most recently with the EVs anyway, we've added a new wrinkle, which I think we've borrowed somewhat from Portland, which is the other Portland, excuse me, and Oregon. And that is to look at using the tax transcript from the IRS so that we can see people's adjusted gross income and then try to line that up with some threshold level of area median income and use that for eligibility as well. So those are some things we've tried to do. And then finally, really finally, I just made a list of some of the challenges that I could think of that we've faced over the last couple of years as we've been trying to expand accessibility to these low and moderate income households in the more rural parts of our state. And so this is that list. And, these are not insignificant challenges. They really have taken a lot of work. I'm really proud of everybody in Maine that's worked on these. And I think we find ourselves in a good place, and it's helped us get some of those good results. So with that, I'll wrap up and hand it over to Sam.
Thank you, Michael. That was fantastic. I'm sure we got lots of questions queuing, but maybe we'll wait and pick those off towards the end.
Yeah, and I would just say real quick, Sam, as you're getting your slides loaded, Michael, if you have any bandwidth to look at some of those questions, if they're easy ones to answer in the Q&A, feel free. Okay, Sam. Thanks so much, Sam Brasso.
Okay, thank you. It's good to be here. I feel like I've tracked a lot of the webinars and the YouTube recordings afterwards, so I appreciate being here. But my name is Sam Brasso. I'm the program manager for the Portland Clean Energy Fund. So let's jump in. And we're at the other Portland, Oregon. So just clear across the state with a slightly different climate. And I hope to be in Maine at some point. So the Portland Clean Energy Fund, or PCEF, is a program that invests in climate action that advances racial and social justice. It was, as Joe mentioned earlier, created as a result of a ballot measure that was passed by more than 65% of Portland voters in November 2018. And most notably, it's the first climate fund measure created and led by communities of color in the U.S. And putting it on the ballot, it was from a core leadership of organizations that represented communities of color, but in a broad coalition with progressive businesses, labor groups, environmental groups, and other social service-oriented groups. Now, the fund is generating about 80 to 90 million annually for clean energy investments, which we'll also talk about, also include workforce development and contractor development. And I note this last bullet here. It's funded with a gross receipt surcharge of businesses with Portland with national sales of $1 billion, sales within Portland of at least $500,000. So both of those, and it exempts certain things like groceries, utilities, and medicines. And it's important because it means, as opposed to programs that come and go, it's a durable funding stream that is here year in, year out, and allows us to think long term as we develop this program. And so we're still in our early nascency, and so looking at some of the lessons learned of other areas, but I'll share a little bit about where we are today. So just a quick bit of history here. The core reason why the Portland Clean Energy Fund came into being was just a long history of people of color and low-income folks being most burdened by climate change, as Joe had mentioned, and least connected to the opportunities to remedy those burdens. This image here just shows an image of redlining in Portland that had taken place, and much reflects a lot of the economic opportunities and the communities they have accrued to and not accrued to. And so, again, we've got communities of color, low-income folks that are having greater exposure and less access to adaptation to the impacts of climate change, low-income folks being more energy cost burden. And where we have mature industries, such as solar here in the state, even those industries are still 80% male and 90% white. And within just our non-residential sector, 96% male and 80% white in terms of the construction workforce. And despite the region, Portland, the state of Oregon, being environmentally progressive, forward-thinking, and very overall sustainably oriented, we still have a 40-year history of energy incentive programs that have done a tremendous amount of good, but that have generally been economically exclusionary, meaning that folks that have not owned their homes, businesses that have not had resources, haven't been able to tap into and access those resources. And so PCEF was created to remedy that, and that's a core part of the origination and the origin story. Just a quick rundown, and this will matter for some, but just so folks understand some of how it works. We do have a revenue bureau that collects the surcharge, and then we sit within the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. We collect a tremendous amount of community input on how we design and implement our programs, and we issue requests for proposals from the community. Nonprofit organizations, as the program is currently designed, have to be the entities that apply for the funding and ultimately administer the projects and programs. We have scoring panels that are comprised of community members, as well as our committee, which is pictured here, which is a volunteer body that makes the funding recommendations to our city council. And then our city council ultimately makes decisions, and then we move forward and we implement and support the implementation of these projects. And so there's changes that we're working through now as a result of some early program learnings, but this is the core of our structure and what I'll be speaking to here today. These are some of our eligible funding areas. And so as you see, clean energy, which is energy efficiency, renewable energy investments targeted for residential, multifamily, commercial buildings, and industrial buildings account for about 40 to 60% of our funding, the largest component of our funding. But we also value other elements of the green economy, including substantial investment in workforce and contractor development to ensure that we are investing in making sure that the workforce includes more women, more people of color, more people with disabilities, and folks that have been historically excluded. But also green infrastructure and regenerative agriculture. So I talk about planting trees, but other green things that sequester carbon in soils. And then innovation, which is really our catch-all for other projects that reduce emissions, but may not otherwise fall in this category. So that's where we've seen a lot of our transportation decarbonization projects. This just gives folks a sense for some of our scoring criteria and the way we evaluate and come to programs and in organizations that are proposing projects. We review the organization information, the description, the scope, the environmental benefits, but then a lot of the social benefits. And there's a tremendous amount of weight that we place here around bill savings that are accruing to people of color and low-income households. So exactly what are the bill savings associated with these projects? Health benefits. And this comes in the format of improved ventilation, mold mitigation, and other things. We do have a very wet climate here. And then climate resiliency. So as we are investing in energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements, how are we thinking about climate resiliency? How are we thinking about cooling benefits coming into these projects? But as well, workforce and contractor equity benefits and making sure the workforce is more diverse, and we are building a more diverse workforce as we build up this pipeline, as well as their budget. So this is just going to speak a little bit about some of the things that we've learned as we've invested in programs serving marginalized communities in our clean energy projects. One, through investing in a lot of these different programs, and we're really just a couple years in, we've already gathered early feedback that programs which require matching funds or homeowner financial investment, particularly when we're serving low-income communities, have had a really hard time succeeding. So we've had to see ourselves adjusting where that's been a basis for the programs, because they've just had a hard time in bringing homeowners in or others in. Many of our homes that we're dealing with have a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance and backlogs that often prevent the implementation of energy efficiency and renewable energy measures. So critical home repair is just that. It's critical, and it impacts the ability to make these investments in these homes. Two, for us, we do have low-cost natural gas, but as we think about electrifying it, it's something we have to think thoughtfully about. Increasing utility costs for low-income households isn't an acceptable outcome in our projects. And so we do tend to promote and look at whole home measures. And so again, utility costs are an incredibly important thing that we factor into as we seek out those emissions reductions. What is the interplay between the utility costs, particularly as we're looking at fuel switching, and how is that packaged up with insulation and other things that are there to make sure that we are making more holistic improvements. And then last is just that low-income communities of color have just an inherent distrust of government, and utility programs that have historically been created with and resulted in unintended consequences or excluded participation. And so by working through community-based organizations and nonprofits, it helps us build the trust with these communities and making sure we're following through on our commitment to making these improvements there. So this is just a bit about what we can fund and some of the work that we are doing as we're funding. One, we are 100% of, we do fund 100% of eligible energy efficiency measures. So as we go into homes, we try to leave no stone unturned, and that's a different approach from other programs. And it means we're making more substantial investments in any given home, and that's something we're going to continue to work and tease out. Now, oftentimes low-income programs are limited in scope to measures deemed cost-effective. We are not bound by those measures based on the core design of the program. And so it allows us to invest in measures that may not from a traditional cost-effective measure make sense, but otherwise does make sense for that particular household. And then while we do have a tremendous amount of other, significant other resources in the region, whether it's our energy incentive program from Energy Trust of Oregon or others, this, by having PSEF in the space, it allows us to bridge the gap for homeowners and housing providers between those rebates and the incentives and the actual cost, which is not unsubstantial in making these projects be realized. And the last, as I acknowledged in the prior slide, critical home repair issues are a substantial issue and stand in the way of making these improvements. And so we do have a criteria where we are able to invest in 30% of the project cost can go towards life, health safety measures, whether that is mold mitigation, asbestos, or radon, other things that may be needed in order to make some of those core, improvements. Now, these are just some of the initial numbers from our first round of funding, which we awarded in 2021, and our second round of funding, which we recently awarded just a couple months ago. And so for the first round, these numbers speak to the investments we've made to date, doesn't reflect the entire package of investments. And this round was a $9 million round. It was our beta round, our pilot round as the program got kicked off. And it featured the substantial investment in planning, which has been overlooked in many other programs. So this is for the part of that portfolio that resulted in implementation projects. These are some of the outcomes we've seen to date. Most of this work has happened in single family and multifamily housing. And so our projects are still underway, but you'll see we've got many HVAC improvements focused on ducted and ductless heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, high efficiency lighting, high efficiency ventilation, and a tiny bit of solar. But what's more exciting is in our second round, where we funded a little bit over $107 million worth of projects, we've got a tremendous more planned work around these upgrades. And so you just see a scattering of some of those numbers, at least close to 1,700 in terms of HVAC upgrades planned, almost 1,000 heat pump water heaters, high efficiency lighting, and so forth. And so this just gives you, this is one of the images from one of our first solar installations at the home of Frances Jackson with who participated in a program from one of our grantees, the African American Alliance for Homeownership, who I know is connected to Electrify Now as well. And so this was, and we joked that this may be the first solar system installed on a Black woman-owned home, but I don't think we can vet that certainly. But this was an exciting moment and brought together, and these are catalyzing investments in that they generate a tremendous amount of excitement, and we're seeing more of these. And this is a project installed by the Native American Youth and Family Center, which is a nonprofit within the Portland area that focuses on the Native American community. In this particular project, they've installed, and you see the image on the left, in one of their multifamily affordable housing properties that they manage, a new one, they've installed high efficiency heat pump water heaters, central, as well as energy recovery ventilators across their units to make sure that folks are being able to get fresh air and have efficient units that are operating optimally. So we have many more projects like this slated to come, but this just speaks to some early success stories. And so as we're still early in our program, and I expect that many of the lessons learned, I appreciate some of that Michael has shared. It's some of the things we're starting to tee up, but where we're going is we're expecting more intensive and concentrated work in high need and opportunity sectors like affordable multifamily housing. We're starting to tease out what it means to develop programming in a way to reach targeted, hard to reach sectors like that naturally occurring or just low cost, unsubsidized housing, and doing so without causing displacement. As well as ultimately collaborating with other funders to maximize funding for major critical barriers. And so for the Pacific Northwest, again, this means mold mitigation, addressing knob and tube wiring, roof replacements, vermiculite insulation removal, and radon mitigation. And because we've already recognized that even with our 30% investment allocation for life health safety measures, we're having to leave many homes to the side, and there are many homes that we can't address because of the level of deferred maintenance. So we're starting to think, what does it mean to get creative, particularly given the Inflation Reduction Act coming down the line, other funding streams coming down the line, to braid these funding streams together so that we can go deeper and address these homes that would otherwise be left aside and unfortunately face the ultimate impacts of climate change, right? Rising utility costs and other things that these communities can't afford to face. So with that, I think that sums up my part for me.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Michael, both of you. I mean, Sam, I just wanted to kind of jump on that critical home repair thing because that's so important. I mean, like I'm sure this sometimes is a incredibly overlooked piece of this whole transformation. Like solar, for example, you can't put solar on a roof where the roof isn't in good shape, and roof repair probably wouldn't typically be thought of as a clean energy transition area that needed funding. But these things are incredibly related. Your wiring, your insulation, all these things sometimes become barriers to putting in heat pumps or heat pump water heaters. So I love the fact that you're really focused on that because that's a really critical issue. So thank you. And there might be a question related in that, I don't know, but if you had anything to say about that exact topic, maybe Michael, and your experience in Maine.
I'm sorry, specific to?
Well, just this critical home repair as sometimes being an impediment to these electrification measures that have funding but can't be implemented because there's some critical home repair issue that's maybe blocking you from doing it.
Yeah, I'm curious whether that Sam is experiencing that because he's wrapping it together with other weatherization measures or not. I mean, we are not. So far, we've been trying to go fast instead of trying to go deep and fast and far. And so I'm guessing that does tend to skip over the homes that have trickier situations like vermiculite or lead paint or any of those, or mold, any of those other things. And so I think the places where that is probably getting addressed is actually not in our program, but in our sister agency's program at the Maine State Housing Authority, where they're paying the full cost. They're running it through essentially the same channels that do the weatherization assistance program. So they're actually set up to remediate those kinds of things you're talking about. Whereas our market-based system is saying, hey, this is an arrangement between the customer and the contractor. Go fast. If you can make it work, good for you. If you can't, this isn't the program for you. It doesn't solve all those problems that Sam is identifying, but it wasn't really designed to either.
Gotcha.
Sam, do you have any thoughts on that versus go fast versus go deep?
I think it's something that we've, early on our committee deliberated, and I think there was intentional recognition that we've had programs within the state and fortunately we've got partners and programs that are focused on getting as many of whether it's heat pump water heaters, although we've got our work to do here too out there. And so the focus has been going deeper, in part because there is a recognition that for many of these households that while just replacing a singular system may work, from an efficiency perspective, from being able to do that insulation, do that attic insulation, the flooring insulation, and therefore then having to deal with some of those, the vermiculite and other things is going to be critical, so we can reduce the load of that building, and then make sure that we're right sizing the heat pump that we're installing as opposed to oversizing the system so it's an intentional approach, recognizing that other programs don't get to go there, and we do get to go there, and it gets us in homes that otherwise wouldn't get these other issues addressed.
Yeah, it seems like there's sort of like we need all of the above, in a kind of way, it seems like to me, but it's interesting. I mean, I think Michael, you mentioned this kind of tension between market transformation and equity to some degree. It's like where it basically comes down to how do you spend your money, right? Do you spend your money in order to get the most number of heat pumps out there, or in order to make the most number of really disenfranchised families, like in a better space? And I know you can't say that it's one or the other, but I'd be curious, what your thoughts are about how you balance that tension, and what are there any learnings that you've had from that might be useful for other people who are going to be facing those same decisions?
Well, I think partly my answer is that it's a little soon to say. Like, I think we need to look at the numbers and see what kind of results we're getting a year or two from now. And if there's a really disproportionate performance where the lower income folks are just not participating at the level that's reasonable, then you got to make up the difference. You got to address that. But so one example is, first of all, we're trying a little bit of the all of the above, or all of the above approach. So we have parallel tracks that are all trying to add heat pumps, but for different audiences and trying different strategies. So and trying to stretch our dollars as far as we can. So we do have this one element, which is saying if you're low income, we have, I'm sure other states' programs also for their heat program are evaluating the energy burden of the individual household. And so those, at least the way Maine does it, is those that score the highest on the energy burden are at the top of the line to get weatherization assistance program help. And that's also translating into participation in these heat pump programs where they would get 100% of a heat pump paid for through that program. It chews up a lot of budget. And so you can't do big numbers, but you can do significant numbers, especially with some of the new federal funding that's available. So that's great. We're seeing how that does. Ours, as I described, is using the premise that there is some fraction of the low and moderate income that are not at the neediest, but are maybe have some savings, maybe have some means, and they can contribute in some way. And I should mention, we're trying to look at some creative ways of doing more financing or a lease program where maybe they could use a series of payments over 4 or 5 years to pay down a fraction of the project cost and not only stretch the dollars further, but I think there's a form of equity there too, that people know this isn't just, you don't just get stuff, everyone's got to do what they can to contribute to making this transition happen. So if people do have some means, it's I think it sends a really powerful political message to the policymakers that people are chipping in what they can. And so we're trying that. I can't sit here today after doing it for a couple of years and tell you that I feel confident in the numbers of participants that we're seeing, but we are getting our budgets out the door. So we're definitely setting aside a chunk of the budget that we have tried to estimate, that we have strings attached to the different sources of funding that we have. So we're trying to make a really significant amount of budget available for that purpose. We've been really lucky, obviously, to have all these federal funds arrive in the last couple of years and to have that coming for the next couple of years. So that's going to help tremendously. I don't know that. So those are some of the things. I also want to say we've completed 1 year of a 2-year pilot where we're changing out the Miller furnace in a mobile home, which is a natural gas or propane fired unit. And you can slide certain heat pump units right down in there to replace them. It's more expensive, but it's a whole home solution. And we're extremely excited. They worked great last winter through the whole winter, kept all those mobile homes warm, even at minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And we think it's going to save these tenants a ton of money. So if it works well for another winter and we're going to increase the sample size, I think that's something we're going to try and scale up big time.
That's great, Michael. And I mean, so there's 2 things I want to talk about, but maybe we'll do, since you brought up tenants, maybe we'll go there first. Some folks are asking, how do we extend these benefits to tenants? And so I'd love to hear from both of you, maybe starting with Sam on renters and tenants. How do we make sure they're getting access to these clean energy technologies?
Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge also, our program is focused within the city of Portland. So we've got a boundary that isn't statewide. So there's different calculus that we're the fortune to be able to make, and given the resource and the way that this resource came into being through a ballot measure advocated by community. So I want to make sure that folks can't expect every program to be approaching things the similar ways. As we think about tenants, and this is one that's going to take some time, and it's going to take collective experimenting, I'd say progressive landlords to work with us, but a lot of our focus early on has been on affordable housing as we were exploring and focusing on multifamily housing. So I'll acknowledge we haven't And then part of that is the structure where nonprofits apply. So affordable housing entities are oftentimes our community development organizations are nonprofit entities. And so they've applied to do work. And in those instances, they already have sort of a de facto, as part of the stipulations, their funding, they already have affordability criteria. So in those instances, in some ways we're saved because we get those emissions reductions, we get a lot of those bill savings accruing either directly to the household or to the organization so they could continue doing a lot of the work that they do and be able to continue serving households. It is going to be the area where we expect that we're going to have to put our greatest onus and our best minds and a lot of just creative thinking in terms of figuring out what is the right balance of us entering into a partnership, an agreement with a landlord so that in a sense, there's incentives for them to participate, whether that may be a solar system offsetting their central, their common area utility bill costs, and allowing us to do heat pumps where we get to address a tenant's cost and being able to bring that sort of partnership to the table where it's a little bit of something for both of them with an acknowledgement or some recognition that there is some sort of rent stability provision in there and figuring out what is that right level. At the state, we do have there is a statewide sort of rent stability measure where I think landlords can't raise their rents in a given year no more than 7% plus CPI. So there's already that. So it's figuring out, okay, there's that already. What can we do in between that and bring that in a way that is more reasonable? Because this year that ended up, given the way inflation is, it's a fairly high number. So I just want to name that that's an area that we're eager and interested in. I expect that's the area we'll be exploring here in the coming years and hopefully developing some pilots and approaches and models that are going to be replicable elsewhere.
I'll say from Maine's perspective, tenants is always a really tricky challenge. First and foremost, we prefer to just work with the landlords if we can find landlords that are sympathetic. Certainly, any time that these properties are publicly owned, that's a great starting place. So we've had a lot of really good conversations with public housing authorities, affordable housing developers. That's a great starting place. There is some challenge with dealing with landlords. We're always a little concerned that we're going to dump a bunch of money to make improvements in the home, and then they're going to thank us for that and flip the building. So that it's no longer serving affordable housing families. And that's kind of defeats the purpose, especially if we want to do something extra generous to try and make that happen. So that's always been a hard nut to crack. There are some other thoughts that we've been looking at that would work directly with the tenant, with maybe some kind of a lease or some kind of a flexible financing arrangement. But, it's tricky to think that you're going to put a significant piece of HVAC equipment that's going to stay with the building through an interaction with the tenant and not deal with the landlord. We have been pretty excited, though, to see the evolution of new models of heat pumps, including those that can, vertically packaged AC units can now be vertically packaged heat pump units. That's pretty awesome. You can slide it right into a closet and it'll feed right into the entire ductwork of an existing duct system. One of the problems we see generally is that a lot of apartments are pretty small and they just have a very low heat load. And so the cost effectiveness of starting there is pretty low. You're spending a fair amount of money on a piece of equipment that's not going to get to work all that much. So we think that VRF systems may be a better way to go over time, or other things like that where you can individually meter to the buildings. I do want to say one other thing. I know we're running low on time, but I think people should really look at this question of whether you need to invest in tightening up the building and increasing the insulation in order to quote unquote right size the heating system. I think with the advent of inverter technology, that is very different in the heat pump scenario than it is with a central heating system, a conventional combustion heating system. And so we've frankly just decided to go a different way. We're like, no, don't get slowed down by the building envelope, which has just got so many challenges to it. Go with the heating system. In Maine, where we have very significant carbon emissions associated with our heating fuels, our delivered heating fuels, the bang for the buck on reducing carbon and helping people save money is to work on the heating system first, not necessarily the envelope.
It's interesting. Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I'm hopeful that some of these portable heat pump systems, which currently wouldn't really, they're not capable of dealing with the heating loads that you're talking about, but there's developments that I've heard about that might make these portable units something that could be attractive for tenants. So you could sort of bypass the landlord loop by installing these portable either window or other rolling units that have the kind of heating capacity to take a dent at least out of your oil bill. Could be one way of skirting that landlord issue, but I don't think the technology really is quite there yet. Maybe in our climate here in Portland, and I know there's been some of these portable heat pump projects that have been instituted. I don't know if we have much learning from them yet, but those are promising.
I do. I know we're close on time. I did want to get to workforce. Michael, do you have a hard stop right at the hour? I know, Sam, I heard that you can go a little bit longer from Wendy. Okay, but if you don't mind, I'd love to hear about the workforce elements. I with the New Buildings Institute and Electrify Now and many partners like Emerald Cities, we are working on, how to get heat pump water heaters into as many homes as possible. And there's a workforce bottleneck. And so how do we, seize this opportunity of creating good jobs, good new jobs for this new electrification technology, for disadvantaged communities and communities of color? Maybe Sam, will start with you on that question.
Thank you for that, Joe. I think the big thing I would just say, it's, while we've tried to signal as much about this work coming down the line prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, just with the spending and the resources that the Portland Clean Energy Fund will be investing in this area, a lot of that doesn't start to materialize until obviously contractors start to see those bids and then start to hire. So there is just an inherent lag that I think we're all going to see, and that's going to be, it's going to be challenging. And I think the question fundamentally is going to be, as that workforce and that contractor pool does get developed, as you do start seeing contractors, others start pivoting over into this space because of the resources, just to what extent are we building a more diverse workforce? Are we building a more diverse contracting pool? And so we are supporting, contractor training organizations, workforce development organizations to be training up folks in these spaces. And I'd say we're still at the early end of figuring out how all those pieces are going to need to come together in a way that gives the contractors, whether it's this amount of business so they can pivot into the space reliably, or what are the resources they may need to be able to make those moves. So it's still early. We recognize it is going to be the thing that we're all going to be struggling with, I think, and yet it's an area of immense opportunity in order to make sure that not only from obviously those that are receiving the benefits from these investments, but those that are getting to do the work, since these are well-paying jobs.
Michael, anything to say on workforce?
Yeah, I mean, we have a really robust workforce in this sector serving heat pump installations and maintenance in Maine. We have more than 700 registered vendors, firms that are on our website as listed as being interested in and able to install heat pumps. It means they have the minimum licensing and refrigerant handling training, and have taken minimum training from manufacturers in how to install these units. So we don't have a shortage of capacity in this one area. I wish I could say the same thing about weatherization. We're struggling much more there. But I think what we have focused on, job one through our programs, is driving demand. And we do that with our financial rebates and our financing and our education and outreach and marketing. And we have largely left it to the private sector, to the trade allies, to figure out how to recruit people and to train them up. We got yelled at 10 years ago when we tried to intervene and put in training programs that were publicly funded. Some of the existing vendors said, hey, you put me at a competitive disadvantage. I already spent all my own money to train up my guys and buy the trucks and do all that stuff. And now you gave a whole bunch of my competitors the same thing for free. So how is that fair to me? And we said, okay, we'll back off a little bit here and follow your lead on that. We'll focus on driving demand. So with HVAC, we just have not seen a real challenge recruiting workforce and getting them trained up to do a good job here. But we've been lucky because I think there were a lot of people who had some basic skills and were ready to move into this space. So
I think the
it
risk there,
depends.
Michael, is right that as the statistic that Sam showed earlier, that the workforce then all, might continue to be male and white. Are there any thoughts on how do we diversify the workforce if there's no intervention?
Well, I live in Maine, and so diversifying the workforce in terms of racial is going to be a challenge no matter what we do. We do have a lot of new Mainers. Portland is a refugee resettlement center, so we actually have a lot of people coming in with skills who are really eager to work, and I think they are likely to be the next group that is moving into this sector to do these jobs. So I think that's going to happen somewhat on its own, but I don't have a great answer for that. I mean, you're right. If you want to change the composition of the workforce, you're going to want to focus on those things, as you say.
Fantastic. Brian, any last question before?
Yeah, I guess this may be going to be I hope this isn't too big a one for you guys, but I imagine there's a lot of people on the call who are thinking about their own programs in their own states and how they might learn from what you guys have done. And obviously you got two really different models here that we've been talking about, which is great. But I'm just wondering if either of you had kind of advice or learnings or surprises that have really occurred to you over the time that you've been involved in this that you think would be useful for our audience to hear about, kind of any insights you might have that could help them as they're trying to think about how to do this work in their areas. Any thoughts on that? I know that's a big one, but
I'll start with one. I was asking one of my colleagues, what is it that has been working here that you could put your finger on why we've had the ability to ramp up heat pump adoption like this? And he pointed out the fact that we were really lucky to get a bunch of very entrepreneurial small businesses that saw a business opportunity. They saw that we were going to run these programs and we had enough money to do it for several years and we were going to be generous with these rebates. And that was enough to get a conversation started. And they knew there was a hungry marketplace that wanted some different way to do their heating and cooling. The guys and gals that have started their businesses that have been successful and really grown were not from the heating sector. They were not oil and gas and propane technicians. They sold appliances. They sold, satellite dishes. They understood sales. Most people that are heating technicians, they sit by the phone. They wait for the phone to ring because every 20 years, everybody's central heating system, a furnace or boiler dies and they need a new one. And that's enough to keep those folks busy and keep their businesses going. So they have not traditionally been very aggressive about marketing. And one of the things we've been really surprised to learn and gratified to see is that the more entrepreneurial businesses are seeing this shift to electrification as a tremendous business opportunity. And so they're marketing, they're hiring, they're investing, they're really driving this. And it's made our job a lot easier.
That's really great to hear.
I'd say it feels an impossible question, Brian, for us, but maybe in part just because there's a tremendous amount of learnings that we're taking in as part of just a program model that hasn't been done necessarily, that hasn't been done in this way elsewhere. And so we are seeing a tremendous amount of innovation and learning in terms of figuring out how we start to just in some ways standardize some of these pieces more and more throughout the system so that folks can benefit from it all, whether that's nonprofit organizations that are implementing these programs or just communities that are hearing about this. But education has been the sort of the undercurrent for all of these, that for a lot of the communities that we've been talking about and talking to and trying to bring into the program, there's a significant amount of education that it is taken in order to both build trust and say these are the benefits that we're trying to bring to here. And I think we're starting to see sort of that spread like fire, and it's just a different avenue, a different way where we're starting to hear folks say, yes, I want that too. Oh, my neighbor got that. I would love to be able to get that too. And it's starting to play out. And I guess we're getting to see communities talk about, renewable energy, the solar PV, the energy that they're generating in places that folks haven't had the opportunity to be able to afford to talk about, to have those conversations, because they're focused on many other things. And so that's been both heartening, but it's also recognition that education is really important.
Yeah. Well, I love that comment, and that, because I imagine that that's happening in your area too, Michael. You know, this sort of like making this sort of esoteric concept of electrification and clean energy and everything much more tangible and practical, because it makes your house more comfortable to live in. You know, I love that, and that's the thing that's going to be easier for people to talk about with their neighbors, and to build this kind of movement from, you know, a whole different direction than from the wonky side about like what are we doing about carbon emissions, and it's more about like how are we making people's lives better. So I love the, you know, both your programs really focusing on that is a huge benefit to the whole movement. So thank you for the work you're doing. Joe, any final thoughts?
I just think an added thank you from me, Sam and Michael, for sharing your experience, for running these really innovative programs, and for keeping equity at the forefront of your work. Thank you guys so much for coming on today and being with us. And thanks to the audience for joining us here at Electrify Week. We've really enjoyed it. We will send out a recording to this, as well as the slideshows, probably tomorrow morning. And you can find all of our recordings on, if you Google Electrify Now, YouTube. So as we always say, good luck with your electrification projects. Thank you again, Sam and Michael.
Thank you very much.
The rest of your days.
Thanks.